You say you're bringing us now? I don't see myself.
Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to this new year, of course, and welcome to the Healthy Lifestyles event with myself and Dr. Mott. We're so excited that you're watching, and I know that your life is going to be impacted by the information today. I'm really excited about today's information because it is, of course, what's all we're hearing about right now. So I believe you're going to be really blessed today. And so I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Mott and let her welcome you and share what's going to happen today.
Well, good morning, Dr. Bridget, and good morning, and thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to the Passports to Stimulating Healthy Lifestyles. It's a multi-generational program with Bees Girls Foundation and the Sassy Ladies. We are the Missouri City chapter of Links Incorporated, one of Houston's 8 chapters of Links affiliated with the international not-for-profit Links Incorporated. We are professional women of color devoted to the empowerment of our community. And this program that we are working with is from our health and human services facet. We're working with our partners, Pastor Bridget Hilliard and the Bees Girls Foundation, to improve the health in our community. Each one of the first Saturdays of the month, we gather and we are changing the lives of our community by being informed on how to lower the risk of hypertension, diabetes, heart disease, stroke, and cancer in the people that we love. Since the onset of the pandemic, people of color have been disproportionately affected by COVID-19. We have each had a family member or someone close to us affected by this virus. The CDC projections indicate that the numbers will continue to rise despite the vaccine for a while. So keeping ourselves and our families safe must be our highest priority. So today, we are going to receive everything we need to know to allow us to survive COVID-19 in 2021. We are talking clearly about exactly what we need to do. And we have been given several experts that will work with us and give us information. We'll start with our first speaker. Let us begin. And that's going to be Dr. Jane Morgan. Dr. Morgan is joining us from Atlanta, Georgia. She is a cardiologist and the clinical director of the COVID task force at Piedmont Healthcare Corporation in Atlanta, Georgia. Within this role, she is developing ongoing community outreach in conjunction with the Division of Diversity and Inclusion between Piedmont and the African-American community it serves. Additionally, Dr. Morgan is analyzing the science and the data from Piedmont and nationally surrounding the disproportionately negative impact of COVID-19 on minority communities. Ultimately, the goal for her is to identify methods as well as areas to be improved for triage, for screening, for algorithms, for the overall outcomes of management of disadvantaged populations positive for COVID-19. Thank you so much and welcome, Dr. Morgan. She's going to talk to us about the vaccine, but I know that's on everybody's mind. Should I get the vaccine? Is it really ready? Have they really been working on it long enough? There are so many questions, and I would encourage you to put your questions in the chat as she is going along. And I'd also encourage you to make some notes for things that you want to remind other members of your family of so that you can help them to make the decision about the vaccine. Welcome, Dr. Morgan.
Thank you. I appreciate the welcome, Dr. Mott. It's a pleasure to be here. I want to also thank my good friend, Dr. Sophia Lewis Burns, who invited me today to be a guest. So I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you guys. I think one of the areas in which I'll start, I'll just jump right into it, is really, some of the historical context surrounding the rollout of the vaccine, whether our community is going to accept it or not, and what are some of our concerns. And so, if we begin to think about people like the father of gynecology, Dr. James Marion Sims, who had a bronze statue erected to him in the state of New York, in New York City, for many, many, many years. We finally succeeded in having that statue removed in 2018. He developed a procedure that corrected fistulas in women. Fistulas are small connections or holes between the vagina and the rectum, or the vagina and the urethra, and cause a good deal of discomfort and oftentimes infections in women. He developed these procedures on Black women, used Black women as his subjects. They were not able to provide consent. They were without support or advocacy. He provided food for them, and then he performed these surgeries while he was developing these techniques. He performed these surgeries on these women without anesthesia. They screamed and writhed in pain. They were provided no mercy. One person in particular underwent 30 or 40 procedures, if you can imagine that. I'm using procedures, but the word is really surgery, without anesthesia, while he developed this technique that would ultimately go on to be successful. He did this in a multitude of Black women without social rights and without advocacy. And when the procedure was finally perfected, he rolled it out to white women who underwent this procedure with a great deal of success, and of course under anesthesia, and was hailed as the father of gynecology, and erected a statue to him in New York City for all of his work. And behind the scenes, there had been so much suffering and so much inhumanity and so much angst, if you can imagine what that would be like. And so when we begin to talk about whether we are accepting the COVID vaccine or not, all of that comes to bear. All of the history of the United States and African Americans and research without our consent, and research that was merciless and without compassion and without consideration of our health. The COVID vaccine, one of the concerns that our community has is the rate at which the vaccine was developed. And so I want to walk through that as well. But I also want to walk through the context of we don't participate in clinical trials, which is how these COVID vaccines came to be about. And one of the reasons we don't participate in clinical trials is because of what I just explained to you with Dr. James Marion Sims, the Tuskegee experiment, Henrietta Lacks, on and on and on, multiple stories. We don't have a great relationship with the healthcare system, which is biased. We don't have a great relationship with research. 80% of African-American patients are seen by African-American physicians. The reason for that is safety. Imagine that. We are the only group in the United States that selects their doctor primarily based on safety. Where can I go where I first feel safe, where I feel valued, where my life is of value and somebody values it equally to me? This is how we select physicians. Our physicians are not involved in research. They generally are out working in the community, disconnected from academia or large medical centers. So then we don't have access to these clinical trials. But clinical trials offer our best and brightest thinking. This is where, when drugs and devices and vaccines are developed, we lack confidence that any of those results are relevant to our population because we did not participate. And so when we look at these COVID vaccines, we see the same pattern of business as usual, where drugs are developed and vaccines are developed, and we only learn after they're on market and our physicians are prescribing them to us, what we call post-market analysis, that we are having side effects or specific interactions that are then reported to the FDA, and then there's guidance brought in after the fact regarding how these drugs should be prescribed in this population. It's not only the African-American population, it's women as well, because clinical trials by and large involve white males. And so when we are approving drugs, when we are approving vaccines, we're approving them on data that has been favorable to white males. Then that data is extrapolated to other races and to other genders, including women who often have smaller body mass, smaller weight. We might score their tablets or do a calculation based on something that was not a part of the clinical trial. And so when we look at these COVID vaccines, part of that concern was an article that I published early on, critical of this process, wherein African Americans are not included in the trials, but then we're expected to have confidence in the results. As a result of not only my voice and many other voices who came to speak up to say, we do not want to allow medicine to be practiced this way any longer. Both Moderna and Pfizer were able to enroll more patients in their phase 3 trial, which was their final trial. They had 30,000 patients and 40,000 patients. Pfizer enrolled about 9.7 or 9.8% African Americans. Moderna enrolled 10.3%. Both of those percentages fell short of what I would like to see, and I think other people like me who are advocating would like to see, because it should reflect what is our percentage in the population, which is 13.4%. That's where we need to see these trials. However, they exceeded almost every other trial ever done in the United States, where enrollment is generally less than 3%. We do not participate. And I would argue, if you are seeing a physician for a chronic medical disease that Dr. Mott just put forth are some of the tenets of your organization: hypertension, heart disease, diabetes, cancer, and you're being managed for these diseases, for these entities, and you are not being offered a clinical trial, then I would argue that you're being treated optimally, but you're not being treated maximally. And white males are offered clinical trials. And I'll give you a great example. Donald Trump, when he contracted COVID-19, airlifted to Walter Reed Hospital, immediately provided, under an emergency use authorization, Regeneron's monoclonal antibody therapy, not available, not FDA approved. He was able to access that. The only other people who were able to access Regeneron's monoclonal antibody therapy at that time were any people enrolled in those clinical trials, most of whom are not us. This is the type of thing that we need to begin to understand is not the way we need to allow medicine to be practiced anymore because of our historical context. We need to begin to move beyond exploitation and think about representation, beyond experimental and think about investigational. When we look at these COVID vaccines, the other concern that our community has is the rapidity, the rate at which these vaccines were developed in less than a year, and they are available. So how can they be safe? The answer to that is the SARS virus, severe acute respiratory syndrome, first came onto the scene in 2003. This virus that we are calling COVID-19, which is a disease, the virus is the SARS-CoV-2. This is the current virus, severe acute respiratory syndrome, coronavirus 2. It was named 2 because we had the first outbreak that the world had ever seen in 2003. This coronavirus has a 70% homology or likeness, sameness to the first SARS virus. So it was named SARS-2, CoV-2, coronavirus 2. That was 17 years ago. In those 17 years since we had that first SARS outbreak, we have completed all of the preclinical work, all of the research bench studies, have identified the entire genomic sequence of the coronavirus, all 30,000 base pairs, have identified the spike protein as the major conduit via which the virus binds to our cells to infect us. All of that work had been done over those 17 years before the very first case of COVID-19 was ever even diagnosed on our shores here in the US. So to the public, it appears the virus appeared, and within less than a year, all of the research was done, which wasn't true. What's true is the virus appeared, and 17 years of research was able to be the foundation upon which these vaccines could be developed very quickly. 17 years, which is generally the amount of time that it takes to develop a vaccine, had already been done because of the first SARS outbreak. And so when we move even further into that, how then did we go through the different phases of development? And so when we go through phases of pharmaceutical and vaccine development, they are divided into 3 phases: phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. Phase 1 is really when we are looking for safety. It's generally a smaller group of patients that we recruit, and we really just are trying to determine if our compound is safe or not. Phase 2 is when we look for the doses. Which dose is going to be the most efficacious, meaning that it actually works the way that we would like for it to work, and is also the safest. And then phase 3, which are these large trials with 30 or 40,000 people, takes into account all of the phase 1, the safety work, all of the phase 2, the dose work, and we select the best dose and take it into our phase 3. And that's where we enroll most of those patients. The reason we were able to get this done so quickly within the industry is for the very first time, we overlap the phases. Generally, you do one phase, you enroll all the patients, you develop all of the follow-up data for a year, and then you move on to your second phase. This time we began to work in interim analyses, meaning halfway through enrollment, we took a look at the data. If the data were positive, we went ahead and began phase 2. So now phase 1 and phase 2 have overlapped. Phase 2, we did the exact same thing. Midpoint at the interim analysis, if the data is trending positive, we went ahead and began phase 3. So while phase 3 is beginning, we're still gathering the data on phase 2. We're closing out phase 1. And so all of these things, instead of being done in tandem, began to be overlapped because we were in an emergency, in a pandemic, and we decided to put forth a new model to do that. That is why the COVID vaccine is not FDA approved. There is no approval. The COVID vaccine is under an emergency use authorization, meaning all of the data is not complete. We understand that because all of it has not been done because we did this overlap. But the data that is available is very positive and is supporting the decrease in infections of the COVID vaccine. And we are in a pandemic, and certainly our communities are being impacted. And that's why it's approved under an emergency use authorization, but we do not have data that's sufficient for an FDA approval. What data do we have? We have 2 months of data from the Pfizer vaccine. We have 121 days of data. This is follow-up data from the last person who entered the trial, and then we follow them to see what will happen over a year or 2. That is why we cannot make a comment on what is the degree and what is the time frame of immunity, because we have not gathered the rest of the data. We're still following these patients, but the FDA decided it was an emergency and we're going to roll this out. So this is where we are. When we look at the African-American population, when I reviewed the FDA briefing documents that Pfizer submitted to the FDA for consideration and ultimate approval of emergency use authorization, I won't bore you with every single detail, but I will tell you this. The African-Americans who were enrolled in that trial, there were 9.8% of them. It was the only group and there were Hispanics and gender breakdowns and different countries, but the African Americans were the only group that had zero development of COVID-19 in the trial. Zero in the phase 3. When I look at the Moderna briefing documents that went to the FDA for consideration, we see the same thing in their doses. So I think that's very interesting. And I think we can have confidence then that certainly within our community that was admittedly underrepresented in this trial, but overrepresented in any other trial that we have ever been in, we can have confidence that this data is valuable and valid to our population. Now, where were some of the missteps? As I said, I wrote an article and published it very critical of Pfizer and Moderna because they were moving forward with business as usual. So I will tell you where they've fallen short and why I'm not going to give them an A. In the phase 1 program, Pfizer, phase 1, where you're looking for the safety, had no Black patients. That would be 0, which is very typical. Moderna had 2. And I do mean 2. I mean the number 2, N equals 2, 1, 2 people. Now, when we're looking at our safety data, the safety data generally has, as I said, multiple doses. So for Moderna, for instance, there was a 50 microgram dose, 100 microgram dose, 250 microgram dose. I'm talking about Moderna specifically because at least they had 2 Black people in the trial, whereas Pfizer had none. Both of those Black participants in the Moderna trial were in the same dose group, the 100 microgram dose group. When we move to phase 2 and we're identifying which doses will move into phase 3, where ultimately Black people were enrolled, the decisions that were made on those doses were decisions where Black people were not included. So even though we're in phase 3 and Moderna ultimately selected the 100 microgram dose that moved forward and is now available, the doses that were deselected, the 50 microgram and 250 microgram doses, had no Black people in them. So we don't know if those doses were better for us or not. We were not in those trials. So we allowed a company once again to select a dose that will be given to everybody in the world, and we were not represented. Now, ultimately in phase 3, when they enrolled 30,000 people, and we have 9.8% Blacks in that trial, the 100 microgram dose seems to work well. What we don't know is whether the other doses would have worked as well. So these are some of the things that I think we need to consider. I think we should have confidence that this dose, that both doses in Pfizer and Moderna are going to be very efficacious to our population. Certainly, we've been impacted the most. We should step up and not step back. We should opt in and not opt out. And we should encourage others as well to take this vaccine. They did not get it perfectly, but they got it pretty good. It was pretty good. And I feel confident in it. In fact, today, I actually take the vaccine at 6 o'clock. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Dr. Morgan. Thank you so much for the history. Thank you for the information. Thank you for taking the time to give us an understanding of where the vaccine has come from. Because you're absolutely right. In our community, there are so many people that are hesitant to get the vaccine because they're afraid of how it was done, what it really means for them, and is it going to be effective? So I think that this will certainly, and we'll be airing this over and over so other people will be able to get this information as well. So we certainly
thank you.
I would suggest that everyone would put their questions in the chat, because I'm sure you're going to have lots of questions for Dr. Morgan. We're going to move on to get more information about COVID-19 and our surviving it here in the community with Dr. Joseph Gath. Dr. Gath is an inpatient and outpatient infectious disease specialist serving in Houston community, where he was born and raised. Dr. Gath is internationally recognized leader in the care of those living with HIV, and he has published extensively in the Journal of Infectious Disease, the American Journal of Medicine, the Annals of Internal Medicine, many, many more. Since the onset of the pandemic, Dr. Gath has worked tirelessly in the COVID units of Houston and in New York. Dr. Gath has created a foundation called Cure COVID Consortium, which has a COVID-19 educational prevention component, a comprehensive testing component, and a direct inpatient and outpatient medical care for those infected with coronavirus and are underserved in the Houston community. Thank you, Dr. Gath, for coming out of the COVID unit and seeing us today. It's good to see you, Joy. Thanks. All right, so we'd like for you just to explain to us exactly what we should be doing and what you are seeing. You're working here in Houston. You can tell us what is going on, and you can give us a pulse on what is happening so we can stay safe. Thank you.
Dr. Mott, thank you for that kind introduction. I really want to make 3 points for our community here. The first point is, I think one everyone knows, is that African-Americans are unfortunately disproportionately affected by the COVID-19 epidemic, both as people that are being infected as well as people that are going in the hospitals and dying. And why might this be? Well, the first thing to understand is that we're about 13% of the United States population, but we're overrepresented in high contact essential services. What does that mean? Well, I just walked out of my COVID-19 unit and I looked around, and there were 30 people working there. There were nurses, respiratory techs, people bringing the food, et cetera, et cetera. When I looked around, of those 30 people, 80% were members of communities of color. And so we're out there on the front lines in essential services where we are needed. We're the people that are doing the grocery store checkout. We're Uber drivers. We're policemen. We're firemen. And so we're overrepresented in high contact essential services. So we cannot work from home. We have to work on the front lines. And so we're exposed more and have more contact, unfortunately, with the coronavirus virus because of this. But what about, let's talk about the people, though, that they were told to go work from home. Well, when you go work from home, we return to settings where we're in high density population centers with multi-generational living quarters. And so we have situations where we have a lot of people in small groups. We have husbands and wives, we have mom and grandmother maybe still in the same households. You return to that kind of home setting, these multi-generational households, you have situations where if one person comes in with the COVID virus, you may end up having the spread in that household. And if you have a small place to live and one person has it, you ask them to isolate, there's no place for them to isolate because there's not any place for them to do. And so when you have to work from home in those situations, you're also continuing to potentially be exposed because of these multi-generational living situations that unfortunately our community is disproportionately affected with. So that puts us at more risk to get exposed to the disease, to the virus. Once we get exposed to the virus, we're more prone to get sick. Why is that? Well, there are a couple of reasons. One, African Americans are 30% more likely to have pre-existing comorbid conditions, diabetes, high blood pressure, obesity, lung disease, heart disease, disproportionately affects our community and makes us at more at risk once we get the virus to get sick. And once we get sick, we now then have to enter into a medical system that I don't need to tell everyone then has been historically racially biased because of the structural racism. And so once we get into that system, if we can get in that system because of insurance issues or whatever, it's difficult for us to access the care that we need in a timely fashion. And then even once we access the care, there's an air, if you will, of concern about whether or not we trust the system at all. And so we have a situation where we're more exposed, We're more at risk for getting the virus. We're more at risk for getting infected and getting a problem with the virus. And once we get it, we do not have access to the system. And so these are the reasons why you see it disproportionately affecting our community. And each and everything that I just said is not going to be changed or solved within the next 2 to 3 weeks. And so all of the things that I've said are things that are bringing to the table that we're going to have to deal with when we're talking about the COVID-19 epidemic, and is why that we have to do everything that we can do for prevention. So that's the first thing that's happening in our community. The second thing from the medical standpoint I want to talk about is what do we do with the virus once someone gets it? And that is a very difficult situation for all ethnicities because it's difficult to know what to do. And I guess the easiest way I can explain it to everyone, I want to put everyone into the position to understand. And the easiest analogy I can use is hurricanes. Everybody in the Houston area knows about hurricanes and preparedness. So let's pretend like you're waiting for a hurricane, and the hurricane is the COVID-19 virus, and I'm your weatherman. I'm supposed to tell you what's supposed to happen. Well, you're sitting there waiting for the hurricane, and you're asking me, you see this hurricane in our community, what's going to happen to me if it comes to hit me? Well, the first thing I can tell you as a weatherman is I'm not sure. The good news is about 60% of the time, you're not going to have any problem if the hurricane goes right over you. The problem is 30 to 40% of the time, you may end up having a problem, and I cannot predict whether or not you're the person that's going to end up having the problem. And what do you do to need to help to prevent that from happening? I can't give you a preventative once the hurricane has come over you at that point in time. Once the hurricane is there and starts causing damage, then the question is, what do we do? And we don't know what the treatment algorithms really need to be because nobody really knows what the treatments need to be once you start having symptoms of the virus within you. We've heard from Dr. Morgan about the monoclonal antibodies. That is one of the potential treatments that you can use if you're not sick yet. But the problem is, can you access those treatments? And so you're sitting there with the hurricane sitting over you, and you call me as your weatherman, and I would say, let's get some monoclonal antibodies, but I don't know where to get them. I don't know if the place that you're going to call will have them, and I don't know if they have it that you can afford it. So therefore, are you going to go out and get something that you may not have ready access to? Because again, we don't know. All of the treatments and the programs that we do, we sort of are flying by the seat of our pants about whether or not they can help in those situations. Once the hurricane is over and starts causing problems, you end up going to a place like a hospital, then what happens then? Well, the problem is then, once the damage starts happening, it is sometimes hard to turn off the hurricane to stop the damage from happening. And the reason why people are getting sick and dying in the hospital is because the hurricane continues to cause damage even once you're in the hospital, and we try to do the things to try to turn the process off. And so again, the medical treatments for all of these things are things that are still works in progress, for which we're disproportionately represented in the studies as you've just heard, and that we don't know exactly what to do. And so when we talk about this, the biggest issue is to not put yourself in a position to get the virus. You're already in a position to get it because of what I said about our community. Once you get it, we're not exactly sure what to do about it. And so the most important thing to do is to do what we can do for prevention, which is my third and last topic I want to talk about. What do we do for prevention? Because I think I don't need to convince everyone listening to this that nobody listening to this wants to get the virus, period. We can all agree on that. So what can we do in order to help us prevent it? And the easiest analogy I can use is, I'm going to use my Swiss cheese analogy. You're sitting there by yourself. I'm sitting by myself. There's nobody around me. So I have virtually zero risk of getting COVID virus right now because there's essentially nobody around me. But once I start getting into the population and there becomes the potential risk for getting the virus, as I've already said, that we've heard disproportionately affecting our community, what can we do? Well, I can, again, use my Swiss cheese analogy. Piece of Swiss cheese has holes in it, but there's a little bit of an infrastructure. So our first piece of Swiss cheese to protect us from getting the virus is washing our hands. That's an important thing to do. It gets our first layer of protection, but that has still a lot of holes in it to which we can still get the virus. So we want to get our second piece of Swiss cheese, And we put that Swiss cheese on top of the other ones in hopes that we can cover some of the holes that the other piece of Swiss cheese did not allow us to protect. And that is social distancing. Staying 6 feet away from people at least allows us to decrease the chance that that virus can spread from one person to another. But still, those 2 pieces of Swiss cheese still has holes in it. What can we do next? Well, third piece of Swiss cheese we can put on there is wearing a mask. If we wear a mask, we can put a third layer of protection that continues to cover some of the holes that the other 2 things weren't able to do. And that is the 3 things we have had at least to date. And for the most part, if people did that, they would be able to protect themselves from getting the COVID virus. But we'd like to have other things to do. And the one thing we can add in on top of that is what you heard Dr. Morgan say, is the vaccine. That is our next piece of Swiss cheese that probably has less holes in it. And when you put that on top of the other 3 things that we've done, it gives us the barriers of protection that we can do in our community to not have the virus affect us individually. And once it doesn't affect us individually, then we're not one that can go spread it to the people in our multi-generational households, in the workplace, et cetera, et cetera. And I share Dr. Morgan's enthusiasm about the vaccine and the data, that it is the last piece of Swiss cheese that we need to put on top of everything else. Now, even if we do the vaccine, though, it doesn't mean that we should not do the other things that I've just said, because this vaccine may still have some holes in it that we don't know. But when you put all 4 things together, we hope and pray that that will mitigate the viral spread in our community on an individual basis. And I'm very hopeful with the addition of the vaccine in our community, it's going to be the last layer, one of the final layers of prevention. And again, I practice what I preach. I took the Pfizer vaccine on December 22nd. Thank God I had absolutely no side effects. I'm waiting for my second vaccine to come 3 weeks later. And I'm firmly committed in getting the information out into our community that we get access. And when our time comes in line to get the vaccine, that we stand there and get it for protection, not only us, but the protection of all of those that are around us. Those are the 3 points I wanted to make. I appreciate everyone's attention and hopefully be able to answer any questions you have in our chat time. Thank you so much, Wanda, for the invitation of speaking to your audience.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gath. That was so helpful for us. And certainly now we know that what we need to do to get rid with our Swiss cheese so we can put all the parts together. That's an excellent analogy so that everyone can understand what we need to do individually to mitigate this virus and to help to save others in our community, and why we are at risk, what illnesses place us at risk. And many times in our community, we don't even know that we have these problems. But certainly having this knowledge is the beginning of being able to make a difference. And I'd like to say that I got my vaccine on the 17th of December, and I'm waiting for the one on the 5th. All right.
All right, there you go. All good.
That's it. So our next person, and that we would like to speak to, is Director Stephen Williams. He is we're going to bring this home now. We've talked about what we need to do. We talked about the coronavirus. We've talked about what is happening with the vaccine. But what we need to do now is bring it home to what is happening in Houston. What are we doing now to make sure that we are vaccinated? And we've contacted Director Stephen Williams, who is the director of the Houston Health Department. He has 1,300 employees, $166 million budget, and 2.3 million residents here in Houston that he is taking care of the health for. Director Williams is actively involved in the public health issues of both the state as well as local and national levels. He has spearheaded the implementation and the institution of several programs for the Houston Health Department. AIMS, the Assessment, Intervention, and Mobilization Program, the Project Saving Smiles, and pioneering the Affordable Care Act outreach and enrollment efforts. Director Williams chairs the Texas Department of State Health Services Public Health Funding and Policy Committee for the Senate Bill 969. Good morning, Director Williams, and thank you so much for being here with us. I know you've had some technical difficulty, but we are certainly happy to see you this morning. And we'd like for you to just inform us about what we can expect related to the vaccine here in Houston.
Well, good morning, Doctor. I'd like to, I'm happy to be with you. It's been an exciting day for us here in the health department because today is the day that we are actually opening up vaccine administration as a health department to the general public and those individuals who are 65 years and older and those individuals who are over 16 that have chronic health conditions. It's been a merry-go-round this morning. We had some problems with our we had some problems with our call center, and we've had to come up with some workarounds around that. But it seems because we're working through this emergency. But even with that, we know that we have over 300 people that have already registered, so we're going great guns with that. I'd like to comment on Dr. Gath's presentation and what he said. It's one of the best explanations that I have heard about, what we need to do. I mean, we've all talked about masking up, social distancing, washing hands, and of course, we're promoting getting tested in addition to taking the vaccine when your time comes up. But the way that he explained it, I think, drives it home to many of us. In the health department, we have responsibility at a variety of levels. The first level that most people understand is that we're a safety net provider. That means that we will, in fact, put vaccine in people's arms. But that is more of an operational role, but it's the role that most of the public see. And we're starting that today. But in addition to that, we have the responsibility of ensuring that providers that have vaccine are connected with those providers that don't have vaccine. That A1 classification, that phase of vaccine administration. And I heard y'all talking about you had already gotten the vaccine. It's because you are in the medical profession. So you're in that classification. We're also looking at those individuals who are working in nursing home, long-term care facilities, and outpatient offices. And so therefore you qualify. But our role was really there's and the initial doses went out to hospitals, and we really had to work with what we call non-affiliated providers to make sure that those providers have access to vaccine. And so that is a linkage uh, uh, function that we have been engaged in for the last few weeks. We also have been working with providers' offices who thought that they were enrolled with the state to be a vaccine provider and receive vaccines, but they had not really finished the process. And so we've been offering technical assistance to them. One of the most difficult tasks that I think we're going to have as time goes on, as we begin to open up more and more, is to address some of the issues that Dr. Gath was talking about. We have to ensure that vaccine is available in our communities of color. When we were trying to figure out how to locate our testing sites, we ensured that there were testing sites in communities that had a low uptake of testing, but we also looked at those communities that would be more vulnerable because of some of the issues that Dr. Gath mentioned. But even when we were in those communities, we had to do a lot of groundwork to try to get people tested. And I assume that that's going to be the case with the vaccine. And the reason is because with testing is because the socioeconomic issues, a lot of folks were afraid to even get tested because if they were positive, they knew that they couldn't go to work. And a lot of folks, needed to work in order to eat and to maintain some level of housing. So in doing some of the studies that we've done, what we have found is that there's going to be some issues with people's acceptance of the vaccine. And having folks like yourself, Dr. Gath, actually take the vaccine and actually publicize that will be helpful, because what we found is that people trust their medical providers. They trust their medical providers. And so another thing that we've been engaged in, you've seen the commercials with the mayor and with a lot of healthcare providers on there, really promoting that people's uptake of vaccine. Those are, in summary, some of the things that we have been involved in. We are going realize that we're going to have to be a very nimble system. We're going to at least operate vaccine administration in 2 major sites, what we call mega sites, meaning that we can see more than 500 people or more a day. But we're also going to operate out of at least 4 of our public health healthcare centers, and operate some mobile sites. And what that means is that we will be able to monitor vaccine uptake by geography and hopefully by demographics, and be able to go into those communities where we see that there's a low uptake of vaccine. I'm going to stop there,
Okay.
just in case.
All right. Thank you.
There are questions or whatever.
All right. Oh, there'll be lots of questions, Director Williams. Thank you so much for the update and letting us know where we are. So, Dr. B, are you ready to come back? And can we bring the people from the panel back as well? I'd like to introduce one other panel member for us, and that is Ms. Toni Fontenot. She has 20 years of nursing experience working in the largest hospitals in the Texas Medical Center, which is the largest medical center in the world. She leads a data team for clinical and regulatory reporting while providing COVID support for the vaccine distribution based on the CDC guidelines. So that's in the hospital system itself. So we have everyone involved, and certainly we have everybody is back, Dr. B, and all our speakers are back, and we'd like to go ahead. I know you've got lots of questions.
I have a lot of questions.
Okay, so why don't we get started?
Okay. The first one is based on Dr. Morgan's comments. Why is it that African-Americans are guinea pigs? She's on mute.
So one of the things I'd like to address, and I thank you for that question, because part of what I'm trying to get our community to begin to think about is really what is the concept of guinea pigs.
Yeah.
And the way that medicine is practiced, think about every major scientific development and advancement that has occurred in our country in the last 50 years has come via a clinical trial. If we are not involved in these clinical trials, then we are not a part of these advancements. When you talk about health equity, this is how the health equity gap continues to get larger and larger and larger. And so the concern, I understand, is that if you're in a clinical trial, why do I want them to experiment on me? What if I have all types of side effects? But the question maybe to ask yourself is, if I'm not involved in this clinical trial and this drug gets approved, and now it's out in the mainstream to be prescribed to me, is that the right time in an uncontrolled environment and situation to find out what the side effects are? And so the question I have is, on which side are we really the guinea pigs? Are we the guinea pigs in the clinical trials, or are we really the guinea pigs if we refuse to participate and allow drugs to be developed, and then we discover what's happening to us?
Exactly.
And so that needs to be where we need to begin to think, and how we need to begin to shift our thinking away from exploitation, not certainly minimizing any of the things that have happened to us in the name of research in this country. I want to be clear about that. But we also need to understand where we are now and what is going on, and how the system will continue to move without us if we don't step up, and we'll continue to practice medicine this way if we don't insist on being involved in clinical trials. And the other final point that I would make are the cancer trials, which I find to be the most egregious. Cancer trials in general decrease the rate of recurrence of cancers, increase the amount of time that a cancer can be in remission. And many of the investigational products also increase your mortality, meaning your lifespan by an average of 6 to 12 weeks. Is that time valuable to you for a loved one?
Of course.
Cancers where we are the most disproportionately impacted, prostate, colon cancer, we're not involved in those trials. Those are the cancers that impact our community, and the chemotherapeutic agents that are being developed are developed without our DNA as a part of those trials, and we're the ones that are impacted. Why are we continuing to allow medicine to be practiced this way?
Okay, very good. So one of the questions was, how can we get involved in the clinical trials? Which I think maybe you answered it earlier. That
Yeah, I think so.
yeah.
And certainly we need, I think that, certainly we're being asked, okay, we should be being asked by our providers, okay, to participate in the trials. And certainly if we're not, then we need to ask, okay, because certainly drugs that are coming out and that are being utilized on us, and we know that we have reactions to drugs that many people do not. Okay. And oftentimes they have to be adjusted for us because of that. So, I think that what Dr. Morgan is saying, we really need to seek our providers. And I think Dr. Gath suggested that as well. We need to seek this information from our providers to make sure that we are part of it.
Let me just make one comment too. Each and every clinical trial in the United States has to be on a website called clinicaltrials.gov. And I've encouraged all of my patients, when they have any kind of process, is just Google on prostate cancer and just see what is available. Because a lot of the times the providers may or may not give you the information that you need. But at least if you go on those sites, you can at least see what is available. And some of the studies, maybe at the NIH, they will fly you up there and treat you for free, depending on what the trials are. So clinicaltrials.gov, every study in the United States, no matter what it is, that's sanctioned, will be at those websites. It's an important site, I think, to be aware of.
Thank you.
And one thing that I will add just very quickly is that if you serve a population that's uninsured or underinsured, this is the dirty little secret in our healthcare system that white people access. This is the way to get access to healthcare.
Yes.
You enroll in a clinical trial and your treatments are covered. Your doctor's visits are covered. These are now research visits that are covered. Your medications are provided to you. You not only have one doctor, you have several doctors who are all engaged. You have several nurses. You have people calling you on the phone. You have the direct phone number of your nurse coordinator, of your research coordinator. If you cough, if you wink, if your nose is bleeding, if your hair is, whatever you want to complain about, you call them. They answer your call. They answer your email. Where else do you get health care like that?
Awesome. Very good. Thank you.
May I
Okay.
add something?
Sure.
I just want to say about the trials. I think the key is that folks need to be aware the type of treatment you may have had before going in may impact the trials that you're eligible for. So as Dr. Gath recommended, maybe checking that site before you actually start treatment. I used to help and run a lot of clinical trials. And so a lot of the late stage, especially for cancer, if they've had either certain surgery or certain chemo prior, it may exclude them from those trials. So it's something just kind of engage your physician or your providers about before moving forward.
Good. Okay. What is given to help patients get better once they have the virus?
Well, sort of like I said, we don't know. That's the right answer to that question. People are trying a lot of different interventions to be able to figure out what to do about that. But unfortunately, we don't have good trials to tell us what to do and what to know. And I guess the two basic concepts we need to understand is that there are two aspects of the illness with COVID-19. One is having the virus that's growing in your system, and one is the reaction of your body to the virus. We call that cytokine storm. And both of those things impact the individual patient. Depending on where you are with the disease process is what the interventions that you need to have done. For example, if it's an early viral thing where the inflammation hasn't started yet, then you probably need a good antiviral where maybe perhaps the monoclonal antibodies will work. But once that aspect is gone and you have this cytokine storm, then you need a whole other set of treatment programs. And so that's why it's very difficult. I try to give the hurricane analogy. Once things start happening, the hurricane is sitting over you and damage is happening. It's really hard to know exactly what to do in an individual patient, which is why I continue to say prevention, prevention, prevention. Don't put yourself in a position to have to be in that particular situation.
Dr. Gath, you speak to the people that are experiencing the virus and have mild symptoms, the ones that don't need to go to the hospital. What do they do? I know and certainly when you're in a closed-in environment, a very small environment in your home with multi-generation, it becomes very difficult to do any distancing at all. So what do they do when they have mild symptoms? Do they call their doctor? Is there anything that they should be getting? What should be happening?
The first thing you do, I always say, even if you're having mild symptoms, please contact your doctor or a doctor that's doing this for a living. Some people don't want to do this or can't do this or don't have the expertise or their offices don't want to take over. But now, I mean, if there's any positive with this COVID epidemic, we've learned now for Zoom and things like this, where we can have televisits, even if you can't come to the doctor's office. I always encourage people that are positive, no matter even if they're having symptoms or not, to reach out to the doctor to be able to see where you are and what to do. Because the biggest issue I see for people coming into the hospital now is that it's not that they didn't know they were positive. They knew they were positive 7 to 10 days ago, but weren't feeling bad until they really started getting sick. And by then, the hurricane had really started the damage. If perhaps they would have reached out to their doctor 7 to 10 days ago, hey, I'm positive, but I don't feel bad. Okay, we're going to do some vitamins and some juice and stay as isolated as you can at the house, but stay in touch with me, because if things start getting bad or start turning in the wrong direction, you want to do something right then.
That's right.
I don't know exactly what to do right then necessarily, but things can be done perhaps to mitigate that damage. So please contact your doctor. If they don't want to deal with this or don't have the expertise, ask them who does, because there are doctors in the community that you can Zoom and talk to interact with them in order to be able to mitigate the problem.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much.
The one question, does the vaccine have COVID virus in it? Or can you get COVID from the vaccine? So what is it made of, and the immune response?
Okay, so that's several questions.
That's a lot.
So we have two companies, Moderna and Pfizer, that have their vaccines at least available under emergency use authorization. We have three other companies coming on their heels: AstraZeneca, Johnson & Johnson, and Novavax. The Pfizer and Moderna vaccines are both messenger RNA vaccines. AstraZeneca and J&J, Johnson & Johnson vaccines, will be what we call viral vector vaccines, and I'll explain what those are. And then the Novavax is going to be a protein vaccine. Normally, what we have seen in this country, the way that we give vaccines, they're either live attenuated, meaning we actually give you the virus, but in such a weakened state that it's not enough to make you sick, but it's enough for your body to mount the antibodies such that you can develop some resistance. That's called live attenuated. Or we give you a killed version of the virus. These are the viruses that we see with polio vaccine, measles, chickenpox. These are live attenuated vaccines. And this is sort of tried and true with how we manage these types of disease processes. Messenger RNA is new. It's new to the public, but it's something that's been that scientists have been working on for the past 10 years. Part of the reason that we haven't seen it before is that it degrades in the body so quickly that we were not able to keep it there long enough to mount any type of response. And so when you ask, what are these vaccines made of? When we talk about Moderna and Pfizer, the messenger RNA vaccines, these do not impact your genetic code. And I think oftentimes people get confused between your DNA, your deoxyribonucleic acid, we understand is part of our chromosome, and your messenger RNA, your ribonucleic acid. The messenger RNA, think about your DNA as a book. Let's just say you have a book that's open, and your book is your DNA. The messenger RNA comes in and maybe makes a copy of a page 34. I want to copy this page and send it to my sister. They make a copy, messenger RNA makes that copy and then leaves. The book is unchanged. Nothing has happened to the book. Nothing has happened to page 34. The DNA is intact. A copy has been made, and that copy is taken out into the body to develop the proteins that then create both the antigen for the spike protein, which is the actual disease process, and then the antibodies. So we are not using these live attenuated vaccines. We're actually giving the body a protein message on how it can now create its own antibodies. So that's what that's what this technology, AstraZeneca and J&J will come in with viral vectors, meaning they will use a vector or a transporter to take the protein into your body. These will be viral vector vaccines. It'll be the first time that we see these. And then we have protein vaccines that are coming as well for the first time with Novavax. And so we should understand that science moves forward like everything else. The live attenuated vaccines of polio, think about that. We're talking about in 1955. Do we still want to give vaccines the way we did in 1955? And don't forget the Cutter experiment, the Cutter results from 1950 from the polio vaccine, 20,000 people ended up with the disease, 400 died, 10. So live attenuated vaccines are not innocuous. So I think we should sort of understand that this is the progress of science, that this is not impacting our DNA, that this is messenger RNA that is allowing us to make a protein, and then it degrades, which is part of the reason we haven't seen messenger RNA vaccines in the past, because it degrades so quickly. We weren't able to keep it around long enough to make the protein.
Okay.
Let me make one other statement clearly. You cannot get COVID-19 infection from the virus, period. The end of story. From the vaccine. Yes, yeah. You cannot get it from the vaccine. End of story with that. I got the flu vaccine, so I got the flu a week after.
Right.
Not going to happen with this. So you do not have to be worried about that aspect.
Great. Awesome. Oh, I'm glad Director Williams is on.
Thank you. Welcome back. He's working hard this morning. They're opening up the clinics all over. Okay, so he's out there changing the health already and getting that vaccine out to the community.
So one of the questions was, when will educators and airline employees be a part of the getting the vaccine, because they feel like they should be considered? Can he respond?
Oh, I didn't know if that was for.
It was for Director Williams, but he looks like he's frozen. So, Dr. Mott, you have any?
The phases have already been outlined. Okay. And I do believe that educators are in the earlier phases. Okay, because they are considered essential personnel. And that's what we're trying to vaccinate. What is happening in the city, Director Williams will have to let us know. I think today they started the first clinic, which is those that are 65 years of age or older, and those with comorbidities, those are the ones that are going to multiple different hospitals and also in the clinics. And if you do not have insurance, those are free, as well. So we have those that are 65 years of age or older, certainly ones that are 60 with comorbidities, and I think from 16 to 60 with at least 1 to 2 comorbidities. Is that correct, doctors?
And first responders,
first responders, as well, and certainly that's why we got ours. Yeah, exactly.
Okay. One of the questions is, have the trials been practiced on bariatric patients?
Bariatric, is that the question?
Yeah.
Here are the groups that were included in the trial. And look at the FDA briefing documents from Moderna and Pfizer. They included Pfizer patients between the ages of 16 and 80, and Moderna between the ages of 18 and 80. And so this is why Pfizer has emergency use authorization all the way down to the age of 16. And the 16 to 18-year-old group actually was quite small. But even though they included them, they were able we were able to roll them in because they did not see any significant what we call adverse events in that group. The other group, so the short answer to your question is that bariatric patients were not specifically looked at in this phase. The groups that were looked at were ages 16 or 18 to 80. They also looked at different racial groups. They also looked at pregnant patients, and not intentionally. I think Pfizer, when I read the briefing documents, ended up with 23 unintentional pregnancies. And so they're going to follow those deliveries all the way out to delivery, but they're not expecting any untoward effects. And then Moderna also had, I think, 13 or 14 unexpected pregnancies within the vaccine dose. So bariatric patients were not specifically reviewed. Patients that will have a closer look, the Pfizer group had an incidence of 7 patients with appendicitis. And when we think about that, it sounds like a lot, but it's 7 patients out of 30 or 40,000 people. However, of those 7 patients, 4 were in the placebo group, 3 were in the active group. They are going to do a sub-study just to look at appendicitis. And then in the Moderna group, there were 3 patients who developed Bell's palsy. Bell's palsy is a paralysis on one side of your face. Again, very small number, 3 people. It's not considered significant, which is a statistical term that we use. Is it significant? Not considered significant. But there will be a subgroup analysis just to take a look at that. And the Bell's palsy of those 3 people occurred in both the placebo and the active group, the group that actually got the vaccine. Bariatric patients were not specifically looked at, and I do not recall anything in either of the documents where it was noted that anyone had bariatric surgery.
Thank you. Thank you. One question says, I'm a 67-year-old RN with lupus. Can she take the vaccine or should she be retiring?
So I don't know if you should be retiring, but you should certainly be taking the vaccine.
Yeah, that retirement question is what you really want to do with life. But the vaccine is certainly not going to hurt you. It's going to help. Definitely.
Even if he has a pre-existing condition with lupus?
Yes.
Okay.
In fact, you are the people that we are targeting first.
Right. That's exactly right. We are. And I think so many people have that question. They think that they have something that it certainly has been a problem for them for many, many years. And they're concerned that the virus will accentuate that problem. And that's why we're here, to let them know that they are the ones that we really need to get the vaccine first.
Right.
Yes.
Okay, I think this question is for Dr. Gath, since he's basically talked about to prevent it. Are there home remedies that you should take if you have the virus, or are there home remedies that you can take to prevent the virus?
The simple answer is that the answer is probably no. There are things that we tell people to do if they have the virus. I don't know that they're based in any fact. Vitamin D has been talked about. Zinc has been talked about. Vitamin C has been talked about. When people ask me, I tell them, I don't know if it's going to help, but it's not going to hurt you. You probably are vitamin D deficient. If you want to go do those things, then so be it. But there's certainly nothing that we've seen that's going to prevent the virus that you can take. People looked at hydroxychloroquine, all kinds of other things, and the preventative things have not helped until the vaccine, which is really going to make a big difference with this. And so we tell people to isolate at home, take care of yourself, and that kind of thing. And then people tend to do the vitamin part, but I don't know 100% if that's going to be enough of a benefit to make it mandatory for everyone to do.
Okay.
Great. The other questions are basically things that you guys have already covered at some point or another, except for which vaccine is better, Moderna or Pfizer.
I knew we'd get that one. I knew we'd get that one.
But I'll answer that because I obviously I was a part of those FDA. And in full disclosure, I also serve not only as the clinical director of the COVID task force for Piedmont, but the health equity officer for Moderna as well. So I take a look at these things very closely. What I will address, I'm going to address that, and I'll just say at the end that I think they're both equitable, and I think you should take whatever is offered to you. What's available to you in your area, I think that's what you take. And I've looked at the documents and I think it's equitable. I think both are under emergency use authorization, both have incomplete data, but the data that is available looks positive and it's approved because we are in the middle of an emergency and we are losing lives certainly in our community. One thing I will address that I get asked about often are the different strains. We have a strain that's coming in out of Europe and out of South Africa. And what does this mean? And so I just want to say, when we, just quickly, when we talk about strains in science, we talk about mutations. And most of the time when people think about mutations, they envision something that's getting bigger and more ominous and scarier and more deadly. But oftentimes in science, mutations actually weaken either the virus or the bacteria, whatever the entity is, as it begins to change. In this case, they're talking about these 2 or 3 variants, but the fact of the matter is, since SARS-CoV-2 was known to the world, we've had over 2,500 mutations of this virus. The mutations have generally been anywhere between 2 to 7 base pairs. And remember earlier I said that the virus is 30,000 base pairs. So when you have a mutation that's 2 to 7 base pairs, it's generally going to be innocuous, not enough to create any real change in how that virus will function. And sometimes over time can actually weaken it. What we see in these variants is that the virus has not gotten stronger. It's just become more contagious. So you're more likely, the infectivity rate has increased. So you're more likely to catch it if you are in contact with it, but the disease process is the same. It doesn't make the disease process any better or any worse, but it does increase the number of cases because more people are likely to catch it. The other thing that I will say about the strains, and there have been, over 2,000 of them, is we certainly have not typed and done any contact tracing for all of these strains. In fact, our efforts have been, very sporadic and chaotic in this entire pandemic. So 2,000 strains, they're looking at these 1, 2, or 3, but we really don't know where all of the others are because they really haven't been identified and traced. So I think we can be confident that the vaccines, Moderna and Pfizer, are specifically looking at the strains now for their vaccine, that I think we can be confident because the base pairs are generally so small that the vaccine still will cover these emerging mutations. There have already been over 2,000 of them.
Fantastic.
What we don't know, and the question you should always keep in your mind, is we still don't know how long the immunity will be, because we're rolling out the vaccine ahead of having complete information on how long is the immunity. So I know somebody asked, so will I have to take it every year like the flu vaccine?
Maybe.
Stay tuned.
We don't
Stay
know.
tuned. We're waiting for the data to come in. We don't have the answer to that.
That's it.
Let me just add in another couple of points with that too. When these studies first started, we in the field would have been excited with a 50 to 60% response rate. To have a response rate with 2 vaccines of 95% is absolutely scientifically amazing.
Yeah.
And 100% protection against getting sick, even if you got the virus. That are numbers that were unheard of and unexpected. And to have that kind of information from these 2 vaccines, and hopefully similar information from the other ones, is really a home run for science, and is really another reason why we really need to take advantage of what we've got here. Because those numbers, nobody would have predicted those kind of. The closest vaccine, I think, and Dr. Morgan could correct me, I think is measles, maybe in the upper 90s, but everything. I mean, flu vaccine a good day is 40% in our community.
Yeah,
I mean, this is just amazing what we've got
It's a miracle.
our hands right
It
now.
is a miracle. Yeah. And the mitigation that you're talking about, this helps us with the Swiss cheese that you put together, that along with this vaccine, then we can keep our community from having, okay, because the CDC is talking about 500,000 people dying in the United States. And if many of those people are people of color, then we've really got to get out there and make a difference with the people that we know. So I really want to thank you all for everything, okay, that you have brought to the table here for us, for taking time out from, and I know you're busy today, okay, for taking time out for your schedule. I've been contacting you back and forth, and we certainly appreciate your answers, but we really appreciate you giving this information to our community. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to add just one other thing so that people have it in context. There are over 123 companies developing COVID vaccines. I want us to think about that, because in the pharmaceutical industry, everybody competes to be first to market, because you can see Moderna and Pfizer just, will make a windfall on being first to market.
Sure.
What we don't know when it's all said and done is which one will be best in class. Which one is going to be best for us? So it's important that we continue to participate in these trials. 123 companies, these are the first ones. They may not, in the long run, end up being the best ones for us. And we've got to be a part of that answer and that solution as companies continue to roll it out. We have first to market, but we want to make certain that we have access to best in class.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. Thank you, Dr. Mott, and thank you all for the information. I think it was extremely helpful information. And so we really appreciate you all caring about our community and caring about people. And as Dr. Mott mentioned earlier, this will stay online, so they will be able to access this information later. Is there any one last statement from anyone else besides Dr. Morgan? She made her statement. And another question, someone asked about when you do the clinical trials, will they take care of your medical expenses if some side effects later on?
Yes.
Yes.
And that's part of your informed consent. And you want to make sure that that's in the informed consent when you sign it.
Great.
May I add something kind of before we leave?
Yes.
So I think the clinical trials are great. What I want to focus on, though, is I want people to understand just because we have a vaccine, it doesn't mean you don't continue to wear your mask. Even if it's your family member, I have kids coming home from college. I wear a mask around my kids because I don't know what my kids are doing out there. Don't feel so comfortable because it's someone you know, which I think a lot of people get in sort of kind of a comfort zone because it's a friend or it's a family member, especially if you're either around elderly parents or your kids are going around grandparents. Please be mindful. Maybe don't do those visits. Wear your mask. We're around the holidays. Keep the visits via Zoom.
Yes.
We're seeing a lot of cases spiking in the hospitals right now, like across the board, and among employees. So that's just kind of my 2 cents. Even when you get the vaccine,
Students, I've been reminding them to wash their hands, to make certain that they put on their mask for protection, and to make certain that they stay a safe distance of 6 feet. And generally what I will say is to remember it, wash your hands, always wear protection, and practice safe 6.
And I guess my final comment would be to say that we go back to the Tuskegee days when the African-American men had syphilis, and when penicillin came available, they were not given the penicillin in order to be able to mitigate the disease that they had. We now have COVID-19, where we didn't have anything to treat it with. Now we have something that can prevent it. And so for us to say that we're not going to take it because of Tuskegee is actually the exact opposite. I would encourage the community, because of this 95% efficacy and because of the data, to roll up your sleeve when your time comes in line, and please take the vaccine, not just for you, but for our community here in Houston to mitigate the disease process. It's the only way we're going to get through this and get around it and stop the deaths that we're seeing.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you all so much. Yes.
Well, thank you.
All right. This has been
Thank you.
fantastic, and it certainly will make a difference in our community. I'd like to let the participants know that certainly we do fun things, okay, on this. We don't only talk about medicine. So the raffle that we usually have, there are 3 winners, and certainly they will be receiving their information, and they are Linda Collins, Marianne Shine, and Loretta Brock, and you will be getting an email from the links concerning it. So there's something good coming out of this all the time. And
one more thing, Dr. Mott, is that they pinned in the comments the information about today. For those of you who missed it, go back and make sure you get it. And I'm going to have them pin it one more time, the link, so that they can get the written out information to go along with the study today. So
we did some documents for them so that they would have some information on mitigation, some information on COVID-19, just basic information that they can keep on the refrigerator or wherever, just telling them what they need to do to stay safe.
Right. And the bottom line is, even if you get the vaccine or when you get the vaccine, wear your mask, wash your hands, and social distance so that so we can stop the whole process.
That's it. And we can all stay safe and be back next year.
Yes.
For the next process. We won't lose anybody. There won't be anybody that's not at our tables for the holidays.
Absolutely.
All right. Thanks, guys.
All right. God bless.
All right.
Bye.
Fantastic. Bye. We do heart disease next month.
Awesome.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.